Czechast, a podcast in English about Czech and Moravian society, history, culture and economy.
Welcome to Czechast, a podcast that dives deep into the stories of Czech history, identity and the people who carry it with them, near and far. I'm your host, Vít Pohanka, and in today's episode we are picking up a story I began in 2023. Back then, I spoke to Jean Svoboda, an Australian with Czech and Latvian roots who had spent years painstakingly piecing together the story of her ancestors, many of them from Moravia. Now I finally get to meet her in person here in Prague together with her partner Richard. She has returned to Czechia for the second time, continuing her journey through archives, churches and villages, trying to complete what she calls a puzzle of her family's past. And Richard, though not on a quest of his own, has come along for the ride and shares, for example, what it was like for him as an Australian who had never been outside the country to come to Czechia and Europe.
To start with, I was like a deer in the headlights. You know, it was amazing. The people, the history got me, because back home, history to me is 150 years old.
Together they reflect on what it means to come from a European background and grow up in Australia and to carry that quiet generational pool of stories untold.
I mean, having been brought up by two European parents, one Czech, one Latvian, they brought some of those things with them. You know, shoes off at the door. Mm-hmm. Every time you welcome somebody into your house, yes, you give them a hug. So I have been brought up with that European traditions or ways of life. And it's not that common. It would be if you found a group of Europeans in Australia, they would be doing that, but not in the general population.
As she follows the traces of her ancestors, Jean is beginning to see the once blurry outlines of lives lived and connections that still endure.
Now I've got some more evidence, I suppose, that those people existed and that I came from those people and that there are people that are alive that I belong to as well.
And Richard, while less drawn to digging into his own family's history, has been right there beside her, watching the pieces fall into place.
It's wonderful to see what she's achieved in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. You know, the amount of time and research and hours that she's put in, she could have done another university degree. That's the amount of commitment that she's put into it.
So join me now for this conversation with Jean and Richard, a couple tracing the past, mapping roots and reflecting on how much a journey like this can say about who we are and where we come from.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.
So Jean, welcome back to Czechia. How does it feel to return, again with your partner Richard by your side?
Because it's the second time that we have been here, it's a lot more comfortable and a lot more familiar going places. So even though I felt like coming home, it feels more like home in that we're more aware of and comfortable with our surroundings.
I think this theme of coming back home is something that we will return to. But you say you feel more comfortable. Was there perhaps something that really surprised you when you came for the first time to Czechia?
The helpfulness of the people in my quest to find information about my ancestors and about my father and grandfather. Everybody was exceptionally helpful to me and generous with their time and their town gifts that they gave me.
Now, if I may ask Richard, when you came here for the first time, how many years ago was it? When was that?
2
2 years ago. And you've never been outside of Australia before, or some Pacific islands, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
What was it like, to come to Czechia?
To start with, I was like a deer in the headlights. It was amazing. The people, the history got me, because back home, history to me is 150 years old. And you come here and you see all this, and you can touch it and feel it, see it, and to get your head around it. It's a big thing. And driving on the other side of the road is different too.
That's a big difference, isn't it? Yeah. It seems to me that sometimes we forget, that Australia is basically younger than the United States. I mean, when it comes to white settlement, of course,
yes,
only.
Yeah.
So I suppose the buildings and the whole atmosphere, that was something completely new, like you said.
Everything looks completely different. It's just not similar at all. And even the distances between everything is so different to home. There's much more space.
Much more space in Australia.
Yes,
Yeah. And here is everything's crowded, no? A little bit.
Yeah, no, well, if I drive a truck for my job, so in my normal work day would be the equivalent of driving one side of Czechia to the other and back.
So how many hours do you spend a day on average in a car in Australia, you think?
In my truck, I spend 12, 14 hours a day.
Oh, gosh. That's that's something that's hard to imagine for us Czechs. How are the Czech drivers? Let me ask you like that.
They're variable. They like overtaking when other cars are coming. I know that one. And when you're going between villages, they like the Grand Prix start when you get to the other side to pass you. But no, overall, they're
you feel safe.
Yeah,
I mean, in general.
Yeah, no, it's pretty good. I just have to concentrate on the things like roundabout, because you're so entrenched to looking right all the time. Here, everything you have to look left, so it's against your basic normal instincts. But apart from that...
But you can get used to it, no?
Yeah, it's fine. You just have to focus. I can't afford not to focus on what I'm doing because, yeah...
I can bear witness here, just a little diversion. I didn't have so much of a problem adjusting when I was driving in Britain. Where I had a problem was the Bahamas, because the Bahamas, they drive on the left-hand side as well, like in Britain or Australia. But they've got all cars imported from the United States. So you've got the driving wheel on the wrong side, And that can be quite
challenging.
Challenging, especially if you want to overtake someone and you don't see, what the heck is going on. But that's not why I invited you here, but just out of curiosity, wanted to ask about it. But back to the story. Jean, was there perhaps a moment on this particular trip in 2025 that moved you even more than something that you experienced during your first visit 2 years ago?
Yes, because this time I had made other connections, and again, the mayor of Ostopovice, he organised for me to go to the municipal office and find a death record for my great aunt. So that was informative from also a health perspective of the family. The other thing was I made connection with a chronicler from Šlapanice. He had done a lot of work. He provided detailed explanations of the Svoboda family, of my grandfather's siblings. So I knew a lot more about what they did in their lives. What he didn't have was very much about the three sisters of my grandfather. But what I did get was to meet my second cousins from two of those sisters.
I know that we discussed it quite in length in our first conversation at the end of 2023, but for the benefit of the listeners who hadn't listened perhaps to that episode, whereabouts geographically were your ancestors based? Because you mentioned Šlapanice, which is a small town near Brno, actually in Moravia. Now we are talking in Prague. Where were your ancestors where did they live mostly?
Well, in the early 1700s, my ancestors were millers in the town of Obichtov. That generation produced another miller, and from that generation it produced a teacher. And so he moved from Obichtov to Radňovice and was a teacher there, and then met his future wife she was from Moravia.
From Moravia? Yeah.
Yeah. And then my 2 times great-grandfather died very young. He was 55. And so my great-grandfather obviously had just passed his education as a teacher, and he then moved to Šlapanice. And he took with him his siblings because the youngest was only 8, and he took his mother. So he looked after the family when he was 24. He looked after the whole family. And then when he married, there were 10 children from that marriage. And one of those was my grandfather.
So they mostly lived in Western Moravia, we can say.
Yes.
Moravia being the eastern part of the country, but they were in the western part of Moravia. And you mentioned the villages of Obichtov and Radňovice, which I know very well because I live in Žďár nad Sázavou, which is literally several kilometers away. Yeah, and I went through Radňovice just the other day, just remembering it. Richard, back to you. I mean, we are now talking about the family history, which spread in this area. I don't know, Šlapanice can be something like 100 kilometers away from Radňovice, from Obichtov, not very far, which in Australian kind of landscape is literally, it's very close by. But for us, it's another part of the country. And you mentioned driving as well. So you must feel like you are basically driving through one county or something like that here, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just one little village after another. Very good.
Jean, in the last conversation that I mentioned, you said it felt like a child finally coming home. Now, you started this discussion again, like coming home. If you were to explain to someone who hasn't had the same experience, what is it like? How does it feel?
I suppose there's a warmth in connecting to other people. There was a very small incident in a supermarket, of all places, where they charged me the wrong thing, and the girl picked it up and she called someone else and they redid the money, and the other one pointed and I had to go somewhere else, and this woman gave me the remains of my change. But when she gave it to me, she put her arm on my arm in a very warm sort of way. And I thought, this is what's missing in Australia. It's that other side of almost being family, but you're not family. This is a stranger in a shop. I don't know whether that's just typical of a small town like Šlapanice or whether that's unusual. But she didn't know me.
So there was you mean the physical touch, is different. That wouldn't probably happen in Australia.
Not from a shop assistant, So that struck me, and I got a few tears in my eyes. So. And
it struck you nicely, yeah?
Yes.
It wasn't an unpleasant experience.
No, and I suppose it's an unusual experience to emotions, but it did.
How about other things, these small things like you mentioned physical contact? I don't know, do you perhaps see people kissing here more than in Australia? Or is that, Richard, you are nodding, yeah?
Yes, I see it a lot. Hugging, and friends, when they meet, they hug and kiss each other.
I wonder whether it's a kind of continental European thing, having lived in France for some time. They are embracing and kissing on the cheeks, I have to say, very, very often, of course, yeah. But it still hasn't arrived to Australia.
No, having been brought up by 2 European parents, one Czech, one Latvian, they brought some of those things with them, shoes off at the door. every time you welcome somebody into your house, yes, you give them a hug. So I have been brought up with that European traditions or ways of life, and it's not that common. It would be if you found a group of Europeans in Australia, they would be doing that, but not in the general population.
It's an interesting thing, this taking off your shoes when you come into the house. I've got some friends in Britain who had been to Czechia, and they think it is civilized, and they make they take off their shoes as well. You know, it's probably one thing that that kind of spread from Central Europe. It's not just a Czech thing, I think. Yeah, this might sound trivial, but I'm really curious. Do you take off your shoes when you come home?
I do.
You do, but Richard doesn't.
Oh, only my work boots. I take them off.
Yeah. But not normal, I don't know, sneakers or something like that. You wouldn't take off. But again, back to your story, you, I think, indicated that, Jean, I'm asking, that you uncovered some new documents, some new things. So already this trip, which is not even in its half, I think, already produced something, yeah? So
it's produced,
about your family. So what was it?
It's produced a lot. Again, I have met 2 of my second cousins, and one of those luckily was interested in family as well, and therefore she had photos, and she had photos of my grandfather and one of my grandfather, grandmother and my father as a small child. So they are the first photos I've actually seen of my grandmother, and because she was the granddaughter of one of my grandfather's sisters, she also had photographs of my great-grandmother as a very old lady, and on the back it was probably a couple of months before she died. So those are very precious photographs, so they'll be protected and treasured all the way back home.
So did you get the original prints, or do you scan them and then reprint them? Just a practical question.
Eva gave me the ones of my grandfather, and there are a couple even very small photos of him playing the organ in the church, and one eating his soup. Very unusual photo, but...
You are listening to Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech from Radio Prague International. I'm Vít Pohanka, and my guests today are 2 Australians, Jean Svoboda and her partner Richard. Again, if you were to explain to someone, and I think we discussed it in the first episode that I did with you, why is it important for you to get these things, photographs and documents, of people that you've never met?
Because I felt that I didn't actually look like my father or my mother. I wanted to see some kind of family resemblances. I have no more relatives in Australia since my mother and father passed away. So for me, it's learning and having a new family that I haven't had. Mm-hmm. I think last time too I said that I had lost any connection because my father did not, after the war and his displaced persons camp experience, did not discuss very much about his life. So I really did not know what his daily life was like, what my grandfather was like. He never mentioned his mother. So I had no description or personality description of those 2 people. But now I've got some more evidence, I suppose, that those people existed and that I came from those people, and that there are people that are alive that I belong to as well.
If I may turn to Richard, what is it like for you to be with Jean and kind of be her partner in this quest?
Oh, it's wonderful to see what she's achieved in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. You know, the amount of time and research and hours that she's put in, she could have done another university degree. That's the amount of commitment that she's put into it. And it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle. She started with maybe 1 or 2 pieces, and then gradually got a whole lot more, and then having to put it all together, it's good to see. And she's tenacious, because if she follows one path and the door closes, she keeps going, and then another door will open up. So it's excellent. To me, it's like she's happy because she's found her place, like her place in the world. And it makes me very happy.
If I may ask, I mean, has it perhaps inspired you to find out something about your family?
No, not really. No,
Not really.
no, I'm happy.
Yeah,
It's
not for everyone.
different.
Yeah, sure.
I'm happy with my lot.
You know, there's an interesting element in what you said about your dad, Jean, that he didn't talk much about the old country. Perhaps he didn't share. There was a time in my life towards the end of communism when I was seriously thinking of emigrating from Czechoslovakia, from the communist Czechoslovakia. I wanted to run away from communism, and I didn't have to because 1989 came. But why I mention that is that I thought that if I was going to leave, I wouldn't want to stay in Austria or Germany, not just because I speak English better than German, I don't speak German at all, but because, I thought that if I'm going to leave my own country, I want to go as far as possible. I just want to start a new life. I wanted to have this kind of a sharp end or line, that I would cross and start something completely new and forget. It sounds kind of cruel now that I say it, but that was really my idea. So I have quite understanding. And do you think that corresponds with your dad perhaps wanted to do when he came to Australia all those years back in the late 1940s or early 1950s? Yeah.
I think it was both my father and my mother being Latvian, and therefore having grown up with Russian domination of Latvia in her short life. I think they both wanted to get as far away from war areas, even though it was 1950 and the war was over. I think that idea of being as far away as possible. And that brings up something else. As much as I feel connected to Czechia a lot more than I do Australia, I also feel that point that you've escaped something terrible and you've left all those other people behind. Mm-hmm. There's that feeling of the crossover of, well, yes, I was nice and safe, but the rest of the family wasn't. I don't want it, I don't wish it any other way, but it's also what that situation created, and I think I said last time, created for the next generation of those experiencing war and the devastation of war. It affects the next generation, maybe psychologically in totally different ways, but it still affects the next generation. Whether it affects, and I don't have children, so I can't answer the next question, whether it would affect the next generation after a war, I don't know. I keep thinking of those poor Ukrainian people and their children, that it doesn't, if the war ends tomorrow, it doesn't just end there for a group of people who haven't even been fighting. The ones that have come to Czechia as refugees. That will go on for them for their lifetime and maybe their children's lifetime.
Yeah, that's what I actually like to mention. I think it's not mentioned often enough that Czechia, when this intensive phase of the war started, because the war actually started in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, but there was low intensity conflict, and when this really intensive conflict started in Ukraine in 2022, Czechia accepted most refugees per capita, relative to population. There were more Ukrainians in Poland and in Germany, but the population of Poland is 4 times the Czech population, and Germany is 8 times, I think, so. And the Czechs actually mostly welcome, the Ukrainians. And you are absolutely right that there are already kids who went to school here, who've been going to school here for 3 years, and it's kind of hard to imagine for them that they will go back to Ukraine and lead their lives as before. So just just on the side. But back to your story. Richard, I suppose your ancestors didn't come under dramatic kind of circumstances like Jean's parents.
No, they were just farmers from northern England.
And when did they come to Australia?
Mid-1800s.
Uh-huh. So already by then, Australia was not the kind of prison colony. I think it started,
Mid-1800s was start of the gold.
Mm-hmm. Gold rushes, farming. They were giving away land, things like that. So no, it was very, very prosperous time. And you didn't have this kind of urge like Jean had, I mean, to go back to Britain and do something like that. As we mentioned, it's not for everyone. No,
not really.
You're a happy Australian.
Yes.
Happy to be with his partner. So I know it's really early in your trip now. So where are you? You mentioned Šlapanice. Now you are here in Prague. So where are you heading from here?
To Pilsen, because Šlapanice was spent a lot of family time, and Velké Meziříčí will be family and friends, and I only thought it was fair that Richard gets to see something of the rest of Czechia and its history. So we will go to Pilsen because he would like to see the George Patton Museum, because that Pilsen is very important at the end of the war, because George Patton's troops made it to Pilsen.
We actually did an episode of Czechast 2 weeks ago with historian Vít Pohanka. If you want to listen to that exactly deals, why the Americans came all the way to Pilsen, why they didn't go on to Prague, etc. So it's been, and I have been in the museum, and it's really interesting. I think I think you will like it. And then, I mean, just to explain it to listeners, so you started in Šlapanice, then you came here, you will go to Pilsen, which is Western Bohemia, but then you will return to Velké Meziříčí, which is in Moravia, technically speaking, and the eastern part of the country, and traveling all the time by car, of course,
Except for here.
The
train's wonderful here.
Mm-hmm. You mean in Prague? I mean the public transport.
Yes, it's best ever.
Really? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Because a lot of people complain. I've got no complaints. I think it's really good.
No, because in Australia, if you go to the train station, you wait. Here, every few minutes, a train comes. It's fast. No, it's very good.
I'd like to see some of the cultural aspects and not buildings, like the Puppet Museum, because, Czechia is very famous for its puppet creation. At home, I have a friend who was also a puppeteer, and she actually travelled to the Czech Republic during the communist era time and commented about the Czech puppeteers who she thought were exceptional. So there are things like that besides the museums and other things that many of the other people go to. I have specific things, and also there's a museum on the edge of the border, which is another border type museum that I'm interested in, because I, of course, interested in the time that Czechia was locked up and people could not move around freely between the wire fencing. So historically that's my interest period, is the war and the part up to 1968 and after that.
So, just for the benefit of the listeners, Czechia actually has the puppeteer or the marionette tradition enlisted on the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage. It's one of the things that Czechia is famous for. Maybe you should go, just a little recommendation, to the town of Chrudim, which is eastern Bohemia. Again, it's not that far from Velké Meziříčí, actually. It could be like 2-hour drive, I think. And they've got a special puppet museum devoted solely to the puppet traditions. Just a little recommendation. If you were mentioning the puzzle, that you are trying to put together. How big was the puzzle before you came this time? After your first visit, how big do you hope it's going to be after the second visit?
Because I've now got images that I can add to a whole lot of statistics out of the births, deaths and marriages books from the archives, which are just purely dates and names. They don't give you any description of social life of the times. It doesn't give you what people did in their lives. And there are no photographs, so it's expanded in the way that, especially with my great-grandfather's family and those children, I have a lot more information. And there's still a puzzle I am trying to find, because one of my grandfather's brothers, apparently in a little note, it is that he went on a voyage, and the voyage stated Port Said, Colombo, Singapore. All I could do was put those, and we're talking 1893, I put those in a Google search and came up with 2 ships of the Austro-Hungarian Navy. And one was the SMS Saida and the other one was SMS Kaiserin Elizabeth. I have tried, I've looked through Hungarian records, but it was officers' records of the time. He was not mentioned. I have still to find the verification. Was he in the Austro-Hungarian Navy? The chronicler in Šlapanice found a little note that said he was to give it, Stanislav was to give a talk of his world travels. So there was something, and I can't see somebody from Šlapanice actually going on their own journey. So I'm also making a presumption it was the Austro-Hungarian Navy, but I have no proof
of that. You mentioned that you would like to find out more about the social life, and it's always something that fascinates me. When I hear the stories from my mum, for example. And I'm deeply sorry that I didn't listen or actually take down notes or record my grandfather, who was born in 1908. And he grew up during the First World War. And I just remember him telling me the stories like during the First World War, there were no men, there were hardly any men in the small town of Žďár. So when he was some 8 years old, which would have been 1916, he had to plow, with the horses in the fields, and they really were hungry. I mean, there was not enough food. Malnutrition was very widespread. So he really lived through a hugely difficult time. And what I found really interesting was that in Žďár, they didn't know till the last moment that the war would end. He thought, as a little boy, when he was 10 years old then, that maybe the war will be there forever, And they had no idea that Czechoslovakia was being founded in Prague. They only found out, a few days later, no radio, no television, hardly any newspapers, etc. And why I'm talking about this at this length, I'm fascinating with the stories, how people really lived, and people who were close to me or who still are close to me in those years. So, do I understand correctly? Here is my question. That's what you are interested in too.
Yes, and I think the term now is given to this area is social history, rather than historic events with dates. It's how they lived on a daily basis. I mean, I will never get that, but at least I have some descriptions of what they did within their lives. As my grandfather and his brother Yaroslav both went to the Leos Janáček organ school. So I think Yaroslav was more well known for his music, his composition, and his actual playing. My grandfather was not a demonstrative type of man, apparently. He didn't want any of his music published, but he also wrote music and composed and directed the choir in the church and played the organ in the church. Then you have Stanislav, who may have gone around the world in a ship, and both of those ships, out of interest, also landed in Australia, which is an irony. So I do hope that it is true. And then the other sons worked in the post office, and I've also found that the youngest, Ottokar Svoboda, actually, I have a photo of him in a uniform, which would have been World War I, which I didn't know either. So there's another investigation of trying to find out what was the uniform he's got, an army uniform, and therefore can I find his army registration? So there are still questions.
And if I understand correctly, this is a journey that never ends, I suppose.
Until I find all the answers.
But usually more answers, that there might be new questions again, because the more we learn about something, is my experience, very often what happens is you get more questions, because you broaden the knowledge. Yeah. Last but not least, let me ask you about this, because you're both Australians, and Australians are known for liking beer a lot. How's the Czech beer?
Beautiful. Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if you go to Pilsen, you should go to Pilsner Urquell,
yes.
The headquarters, and they've got a nice exhibition there as well. How about you, Jean?
I don't drink beer at all.
Not at all. And have you tried, I don't know, maybe you don't drink alcohol at all, but some Moravian wine, perhaps?
I had a glass of red wine yesterday in Prague, but I don't know what it was, but it tasted nice. Yeah. So I don't drink a lot.
Is there something that I didn't ask about that you would really like to mention in connection with the visit? And you can take your time.
With the previous visit, I have mentioned that everybody was extremely helpful and generous. And again, so far, in Šlapanice, people who are strangers to me, like the mayor of Ostopovice, taking me and making appointments to look at death records, was very generous that he spent time with us. Also the chronicler, spending a hell of a lot of time putting material together for me, showing me, organising for his son who speaks English. So I have to thank Josef Kopetsky and his son Tomáš, who was the translator, who spent one whole Friday with us to translate, and then again another afternoon when we visited my second cousins in Brno. So again, even though it's only part the way into sort of a family situation, there's been a lot of exceptional help towards finding information for me and helping me. And Josef Kopetsky also gave me all his books that he had published. So again, very generous with people's time.
Czech people are fabulous. I think they're very much like Australians. Easygoing, friendly, funny. I like the Czech humour. I don't think it's for everyone, but yes, it's very good.
Have you got a story about Czech humour?
No. It's just what I've picked up along the way and just talking to people. And I mean, I can only communicate with those that speak English. And it's quite funny. But everyone's very welcoming, helpful. Doesn't matter where you go. I think the key to travelling here is to not be afraid to ask, but to ask in the right way. Mm-hmm. And you'll get the response you get is comparable to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I do.
Some people will go, oh, what about this? Demand. If you demand, you're not going to get a response. So calm, if you know what I mean. So, no, they're very good. Very good. I enjoy it.
Okay. Jean, Richard, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being here. And I'll keep my fingers crossed in that your quest goes on as well as you like, as you would want it. And I hope you have a great time in Pilsen too, as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My great thanks to Jean and Richard for taking the time to speak with me in Prague and for sharing their deeply personal journey of discovery, connection and identity. If you'd like to hear our earlier conversation from 2023, you can easily find it in the Czechast archive. And as always, if you have a story to tell, a Czech connection of your own, or would simply like to comment, please write to me at english@radio.cz. I'm Vít Pohanka, thanks for listening, until next time take care and stay curious, a naslyšenou.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.